It was an unassuming Thursday morning, and Maya had just settled into her office chair, the sunlight spilling across her desk as she prepared for a busy day. She sipped her coffee, scanning through emails, and making a mental checklist of tasks. As a senior manager at a mid-sized law firm, Maya was known for her calm, collected demeanor and her dedication to her job. Her colleagues admired her professionalism, her clients trusted her implicitly, and her friends envied her seemingly perfect life. She had a loving husband, Daniel, who was as dependable as they came. And together, they had carved out a life that many only dreamed of. Yet beneath the surface, there were faint, unspoken cracks in that image, subtle, almost imperceptible signals that had crossed her mind in quiet moments, but never lingered long enough for her to grasp. Maya was midway through her first meeting of the day when the office door swung open with an abruptness that caught everyone's attention. In the doorway stood a woman Maya had never seen before. She was young, with disheveled hair, a hint of desperation in her eyes, and an unmistakable tension in her posture. The room fell silent, eyes darting between Maya and the mysterious intruder. Maya blinked, taken aback by the audacity of the interruption, her hand instinctively gripping the edge of the conference table. The woman, clutching her handbag with a white-knuckled grip, took a shaky breath before speaking, her voice trembling yet resolute. "Maya, you don't know me, but we need to talk. Now." Maya felt a prickling sensation crawl up her spine. She looked around at her colleagues, some of whom were staring in confusion, others with a glimmer of unease. She was a private person, and the last thing she wanted was a spectacle in her workplace. For a moment, she considered dismissing the woman, but something in her eyes, a strange mix of vulnerability and defiance, stopped her. "Excuse me," Maya said, signaling for her team to remain in the conference room, as she rose and gestured for the woman to follow her into her private office. She felt the weight of her colleagues' eyes on her as they left the room, the air thick with a tension that clung to her skin. Once inside, Maya closed the door behind them, her heart pounding as she turned to face the woman. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words and hidden intentions. Finally, the woman spoke, her voice cracking slightly. "My name is Hannah," she said, her gaze steady yet brimming with an anger barely restrained. I'm pregnant, and your husband is the father." The words hung in the air like a bomb, detonating Maya's calm demeanor and shattering her composure. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, her mind reeling as she processed what had just been said. Pregnant. Daniel, the man she'd shared her life with, trusted implicitly, was involved with this woman. Maya's face remained impassive, but inside, she felt as though the floor had opened up beneath her, leaving her in freefall. She searched for something, anything to hold on to. Reason, denial, anger, but all she could muster was a cold, numbing shock. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," Maya finally managed, her voice steady despite the turmoil raging within her. "But I think you've come to the wrong place." Hannah's expression twisted, a flash of frustration crossing her face. "No, I'm not mistaken. I know exactly who I'm talking to, Maya. I didn't come here to play games or make threats. I came because I want answers, and I thought maybe you deserved them too." Maya's pulse quickened. The idea that this stranger had somehow inserted herself into her life, into her marriage, was both infuriating and humiliating. She fought the urge to scream, to throw Hannah out of her office, but instead, she took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of composure she had left. "Answers. You think you're entitled to answers." Maya's voice was barely a whisper, but the venom in her tone was unmistakable. "You come into my office, throw this accusation at me, and now you want answers." Hannah's gaze faltered momentarily, but she held her ground. "Look, I didn't plan for this to happen," she replied, her voice softer now, tinged with something that sounded like regret. "But I need to know where I stand. I need to know if Daniel is going to be a part of this child's life, or if I'm going to be raising it alone." The weight of Hannah's words crashed over Maya, each sentence sinking deeper and deeper. She could feel the edges of her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. Her mind raced, memories flooding back, small, insignificant details that suddenly took on new meaning. Daniel's late nights at the office, the mysterious phone calls, the occasional distant look in his eyes. She had dismissed them as the inevitable signs of a marriage settling into routine, trusting that their love was unbreakable, their commitment solid. But now, standing before this woman who carried her husband's child, Maya felt the full force of betrayal. "What do you expect me to do?" Maya asked, her voice barely concealing the tremor beneath it. "You think I can just step aside, let you and Daniel play house while I—" She stopped, the words choking her as the enormity of the situation became all too real. Hannah took a hesitant step forward, her face softening. "I don't want to hurt you, Maya. I never meant for any of this to happen. But I can't do this alone. I need Daniel to step up, to take responsibility." Maya's vision blurred, the walls of her office closing in on her as a wave of nausea hit her. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of sick joke, a nightmare she would wake up from. But as she looked into Hannah's face, saw the anguish there, the reality settled in, cold and unforgiving. Suddenly, a sharp knock on the door broke the tense silence, snapping Maya out of her daze. She composed herself, gesturing for Hannah to remain silent as she opened the door slightly to find her assistant, Sarah, looking concerned. "Is everything all right, Maya?" Sarah asked, her eyes flicking between Maya and Hannah, clearly sensing the tension. Maya forced a smile, though it felt like a painful mask. "Yes, everything's fine, Sarah. Just dealing with a personal matter. Please hold my calls for the next hour." Sarah nodded, though her expression remained doubtful as she backed away, closing the door softly behind her. Once alone again, Maya turned back to Hannah, her face a mask of icy resolve. "So, what is it you really want?" Maya demanded, her tone sharper now, laced with an anger she could no longer hide. "Did you come here to ruin my life, to destroy everything I've built with Daniel? Or is this some kind of twisted attempt at revenge?" Hannah's eyes widened, and for the first time, she looked uncertain. "Revenge? No, that's not what this is about. I needed to see you, to look you in the eye, and know if there's even a chance that Daniel and I could, that he could be part of this child's life without." Maya held up a hand, cutting her off. "Without what?" "Without ruining mine. Without tearing apart everything I've worked for. I don't know what you expected, Hannah, but there's no scenario where you and I can coexist peacefully in this nightmare you've created." The words were harsh, but Maya felt a twisted satisfaction in saying them. She was done playing the victim, done being blindsided by someone else's mistakes. If Hannah had come here expecting sympathy, she was sorely mistaken. Hannah's expression hardened, the softness in her eyes replaced by a steely resolve. "I didn't ask for this, Maya. And whether you like it or not, this child is coming. I didn't come here to start a war. I came here to make peace, if that's even possible. But I need you to understand that I will do whatever it takes to protect my child, even if that means going public with this." Maya felt a surge of panic at the thought, the potential fallout from such a revelation spiraling through her mind. Her career, her reputation, her entire life could be shattered if this went public. And for what? For a mistake she hadn't even made. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threats and shattered dreams. Finally, Maya spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you want to keep this quiet," she said, her eyes cold, "you'd better be prepared to make sacrifices of your own, because I will not let you destroy my life without a fight." With that, Maya turned and opened the door, signaling that their conversation was over. Hannah lingered for a moment, her expression unreadable, before stepping out, leaving Maya alone in the silence of her office, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. And as she sank into her chair, her mind reeling, She knew that her life would never be the same again. Maya sat in her office, stunned and shaken, as the events of the confrontation replayed in her mind. The image of Hannah standing there, bold and unapologetic, still burned in her thoughts. The audacity of it, showing up at her workplace, revealing such a personal, devastating truth in the middle of her professional life, was almost more than Maya could process. She tried to refocus on her tasks, on the endless list of meetings and deadlines that waited for her attention. But every time she attempted to concentrate, her thoughts circled back to Hannah's words, her accusations, and that single horrifying revelation. Daniel had a child on the way, and it wasn't hers. As the hours passed, Maya's anger simmered into a quiet resolve. She wasn't going to let this woman derail her career, her life, and everything she had worked so hard to build. She kept her composure, maintaining her professionalism throughout the rest of the day. But inside, she was unraveling. The subtle glances and whispers from her colleagues, who had witnessed the initial confrontation in the conference room, only heightened her sense of isolation. She knew that rumors would be spreading already, each one twisting the truth into something uglier, more sensational. By the time Maya returned home that evening, she was a tightly wound coil of fury and despair. Daniel's car was in the driveway, a reminder of the double life he had been living right under her nose. The house that had once been her sanctuary now felt like a cage, filled with memories that suddenly felt tainted. She pushed open the door and stepped inside, letting it swing shut behind her with a thud that echoed through the silent house. Daniel. Her voice was steady, almost calm. But there was an edge to it, a razor-sharp tension that cut through the air. She heard him moving in the kitchen, and a moment later, he appeared in the doorway, a slight smile on his face. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, oblivious to the storm brewing behind her composed expression. "How was work?" The question, so ordinary and casual, felt like a slap in the face. Maya stared at him, her eyes narrowing as she took in the familiar lines of his face, the casual confidence in his posture. She wondered how many times he had stood in this very spot, looking at her with those same eyes, all while harboring this betrayal. "How was work?" she repeated, her voice low and dangerous. Daniel's smile faltered as he caught the edge in her tone. "Maya, what's wrong?" He stepped toward her, concern flickering in his eyes, but she held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" she asked, her voice trembling with barely restrained anger. "Did you think you could keep this hidden forever? That I wouldn't notice the late nights, the secrecy?" Daniel's face paled as he realized the implications of her words. "Maya, I don't know what you're talking about." She laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the empty house. "Oh, don't you? Then let me enlighten you. A woman showed up at my office today, a pregnant woman, claiming that you're the father of her child." The color drained from Daniel's face, his expression shifting from confusion to guilt in an instant. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some kind of explanation, but no words came. Instead, he stood there, frozen, as Maya's accusation hung in the air between them. You spoke to Hannah," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "So it's true then." Maya's voice broke, her anger giving way to a tidal wave of hurt. "You were seeing her behind my back, and now she's pregnant." Daniel's shoulders slumped, and he looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "Maya, I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." She laughed again, a hollow, disbelieving sound. "Didn't mean for this to happen. Daniel, you made a choice. You chose to lie to me, to betray our marriage, and now there's a child involved, a child that you created with another woman." He looked back at her, desperation etched into his features. "It was a mistake, Maya. I was going through a rough time. Things at work were stressful, and I just made a bad decision. But it didn't mean anything. It was just one time." Maya's eyes flashed with fury. "One time? Do you honestly expect me to believe that?" She showed up at my office, Daniel. She's demanding that you be a part of her child's life. This isn't something you can sweep under the rug and pretend never happened." He took a step toward her, his hand reaching out as if to comfort her, but she recoiled, the disgust evident in her expression. "Don't touch me," she hissed, her voice sharp with anger and betrayal. "I can't even look at you right now." Daniel's hand dropped to his side, and he looked at her with a kind of helplessness that only made her angrier. How dare he look at her that way, as though he were the victim in all this, as though he were the one who had been blindsided and betrayed. "Maya, please," he said softly, his voice pleading. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. But please, don't throw away everything we have. We can get through this. I know we can." She stared at him, her mind racing as she tried to process his words. Part of her wanted to believe him, to cling to the hope that their marriage could survive this betrayal. But another part of her, a part she hadn't known existed until now, wanted to tear down everything they had built together, to leave him and his lies behind and start fresh, free from the weight of his deception. "How can I trust you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "How can I ever trust you again after this?" Daniel's face crumpled, and he looked away, unable to answer. In that moment, Maya knew that whatever he said, whatever promises he made, it would never be enough. The damage was done, and no words could undo the pain he had caused. They stood in silence, the weight of his betrayal settling between them like a physical presence. Maya felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss that threatened to consume her. And yet she couldn't bring herself to step back. She couldn't bring herself to walk away from the man she had loved, the life they had built together. Finally, she turned and walked to the door, her hand resting on the handle as she took one last look at him. "I need some time to think," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "I can't make any decisions right now. I need to be alone." Before he could respond, she opened the door and stepped out into the night, the cool air washing over her like a balm. She walked aimlessly, her mind a whirlwind of emotions as she tried to make sense of the chaos that had become her life. The city lights blurred as she wandered, lost in her thoughts, the pain of his betrayal gnawing at her with relentless intensity. Hours passed as she roamed the streets, her mind replaying their conversation over and over. She thought of Hannah, of the child that would be born into this mess, and a pang of guilt twisted in her chest. As much as she hated Hannah for her role in this, she couldn't deny that the woman was in a difficult position too, carrying the child of a man who had made promises he couldn't keep. By the time Maya returned home, the first light of dawn was creeping over the horizon, casting a pale glow over the city. She felt hollow, drained of every emotion except a deep, aching sadness that seemed to settle in her bones. As she opened the door and stepped inside, the silence of the house pressed down on her, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within her. Daniel was waiting for her in the living room, his face etched with worry and remorse. He looked up as she entered, his eyes filled with a desperate hope that made her heart ache. But she couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. Instead, she walked past him without a word, heading to the bedroom and closing the door behind her. As she lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, Maya felt the weight of his betrayal settle over her like a heavy blanket. She knew that her life would never be the same, that the trust she had once placed in him was shattered beyond repair. And as she drifted into a restless sleep, she wondered if she would ever be able to pick up the pieces of her broken heart, or if the pain of his betrayal would haunt her for the rest of her life. The next few days passed in a blur for Maya, each one filled with a complex mixture of rage, hurt, and confusion. She moved through her daily routine on autopilot, answering emails, attending meetings, and holding conversations she could hardly recall later. Everything felt hollow, like she was watching her life unfold from a distance, detached from the emotions she knew should be there. Her colleagues noticed the shift, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the forced smile she wore like a mask. but no one dared to ask. She kept up appearances for as long as she could each day, only to return home in the evenings to a silence that was nearly unbearable. Daniel, in a desperate attempt to make amends, tried to reach out to her at every turn. He left notes on the counter, sent messages during the day, and even prepared her favorite meals in the hopes that she might finally sit down with him and talk. But Maya couldn't bring herself to engage. Every time she looked at him, she saw Hannah standing in her office doorway, demanding a future for the child that was growing inside her. She saw the lies, the deception, and the cracks in the life she had once believed was unbreakable. On the fourth night, unable to bear the weight of her thoughts any longer, Maya finally decided that she couldn't keep avoiding him. She needed answers, a clear picture of the truth, even if it tore her apart in the process. She found Daniel in the living room, sitting on the edge of the sofa with his head in his hands, looking every bit as defeated as she felt. When he saw her standing there, he straightened, a glimmer of hope lighting his eyes. She held up a hand, stopping him from speaking, and sat down across from him. The space between them, a chasm filled with unspoken pain. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice steady but cold. "No lies, no excuses. I want the truth, Daniel. All of it." He swallowed, his gaze dropping to the floor as he gathered his thoughts. It started about 8 months ago," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was going through a rough time at work. Nothing felt stable, and I was under a lot of pressure. Hannah was. She was someone I met through a mutual colleague. She was there when I needed to talk, and one thing led to another." Maya's heart tightened as she listened, each word cutting deeper than the last. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, as she forced herself to stay composed, to hear him out despite the agony it caused her. "I know it was wrong," he continued, his voice breaking. "I knew it the entire time. But I was lost, Maya. I don't know how else to describe it. I felt like I was drowning, and she was there. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake, and I regret it more than I can even put into words." Maya closed her eyes, struggling to suppress the anger bubbling up inside her. "A mistake," she repeated, her tone dripping with bitterness. "Do you realize how insulting that is? Calling it a mistake doesn't change the fact that you betrayed me. You didn't just break a promise, Daniel. You shattered everything we built together." He nodded, his shoulders slumping under the weight of her words. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Maya, but I'm willing to do anything to try and fix this. I'll go to counseling. I'll take responsibility for the baby. I'll do whatever it takes." The mention of the baby brought a fresh wave of pain crashing over her, a cruel reminder of the future she hadn't agreed to, the life she was now unwillingly tethered to. She shook her head, fighting back tears as she tried to process the reality of it all. "You're willing to do anything?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Then tell me why you even thought you could keep this from me. Were you planning to lie to me for the rest of our lives, pretending everything was fine while you had a child with another woman?" His face fell, shame evident in his eyes. I don't know, Maya. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. I thought that maybe, somehow, I could, I don't know, keep things separate. But when Hannah told me she was pregnant, everything just spiraled out of control. Separate. Maya's voice rose, her control slipping as anger finally broke through. "Do you even hear yourself? You thought you could have an entire secret life and keep it separate from me, like I wouldn't notice, like my life wouldn't be affected by your choices." He looked at her, stricken, unable to respond. She could see the regret in his eyes, the desperation to turn back time and undo his mistakes, but it only fueled her resentment. She was tired of seeing his remorse, of hearing his apologies that meant nothing in the face of what he had done. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them both. Maya could feel her resolve wavering, the bitterness beginning to give way to something softer, something she wasn't ready to face. But before she could speak, a notification lit up her phone on the coffee table, breaking the tense quiet. It was a message from an unknown number. Frowning, she picked up her phone and opened it, her heart sinking as she read the text. If Daniel isn't going to be part of our child's life, then he needs to make that clear. I'm not going to raise this baby alone in silence while he hides behind you. I deserve answers, and so does our child. Let me know if he intends to be there for us, or if I need to take other measures. Maya stared at the screen, her mind reeling. Hannah's words were a blatant reminder of the relentless intrusion into her life, the constant threat of exposure that hung over her like a dark cloud. She knew that Hannah was desperate, that she was seeking security for her child, but the audacity of her demands only deepened Maya's resentment. She handed the phone to Daniel, her expression stony as he read the message. His face paled, a look of dread settling over him as he realized the full extent of what he had set in motion. I didn't know she would contact you," he stammered, clearly shaken. I'll handle this. I'll talk to her." "No." Maya's voice was firm, laced with a finality that startled even herself. "I want to be there when you talk to her. No more secrets, Daniel. If this is the reality I'm forced to live in, then I want to know everything." He hesitated, but her unwavering gaze left him no room to argue. With a resigned nod, he agreed, the tension between them thick with unresolved anger and unspoken words. They arranged to meet Hannah the next day, at a small cafe in a quiet part of town, a neutral ground where Maya could finally confront the woman who had upended her life. That night, Maya lay awake, her thoughts spiraling in 1,000 different directions. She tried to prepare herself for what lay ahead, to brace herself for the conversation that would likely change the course of her life. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the fear, the uncertainty that gnawed at her. The next day arrived too quickly, and Maya found herself sitting across from Daniel in the cafe, the steady hum of conversations around them only amplifying her anxiety. A few minutes later, Hannah walked in, her expression guarded as she approached their table. Maya studied her, noticing the subtle signs of stress etched into her face, the faint shadow under her eyes that hinted at sleepless nights. Hannah sat down, glancing between Maya and Daniel with a mixture of wariness and determination. The tension was palpable, each of them bracing for the inevitable clash of emotions. Without preamble, Maya spoke, her voice cold and measured. "You've made your demands clear, Hannah. You want Daniel to be part of your child's life. But understand this, I'm not going to stand by and let you dictate the terms. This is my life too, and I won't let you destroy it without a fight." Hannah met her gaze, unflinching. "I don't want to destroy your life, Maya. I'm only asking for what's fair. I didn't create this situation alone, and neither did you. Daniel and we made a mistake, but there's a child involved now, a child who deserves a father." Maya's jaw clenched, the reality of it all crashing over her like a tidal wave. She couldn't argue with Hannah's logic, as much as she wanted to. The child was innocent in all of this, a life brought into the world under the shadow of deceit and betrayal. But the thought of watching Daniel build a relationship with this child, a living reminder of his infidelity, was a pain she could hardly bear. "I understand your position, Hannah," Maya said, her voice strained. "But this child's life doesn't have to come at the expense of mine. I need boundaries. If you want Daniel's involvement, then I expect respect from both of you. I won't tolerate interference in my life beyond what's necessary." Hannah nodded, her expression softening. "I can agree to that. I don't want to hurt you, Maya. I don't want to be alone in this." For the first time, Maya saw a glimmer of vulnerability in Hannah's eyes, a fleeting hint of regret that spoke to the complexity of their shared in the days following the tense meeting at the cafe. Maya's life became a whirlwind of gossip, judgment, and unsolicited opinions from people she'd once considered close. Word had spread like wildfire through their town, likely fueled by those who had caught wind of the initial confrontation in her office. Maya felt as if she were living under a microscope, Every aspect of her personal life laid bare for public scrutiny. Friends, neighbors, and even coworkers now looked at her differently, their eyes filled with curiosity, pity, or, worst of all, judgment. Maya had always been a private person. She prided herself on maintaining a clear boundary between her personal and professional lives, building a reputation for being grounded and resilient. But now, no matter where she went, there was an inescapable feeling that everyone knew, that everyone was whispering. She caught snippets of conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered the room, saw the furtive glances exchanged behind her back, and noticed the awkward silences that filled the spaces where casual greetings once flowed easily. One evening, Maya attended a community event that she and Daniel had committed to months ago. It was a charity auction to raise funds for the local children's hospital, a cause dear to her heart. Normally, she would have been looking forward to the event, happy to contribute her time and resources, but tonight, she felt as though she were walking into a lion's den. She could feel the eyes on her from the moment she entered the room, the weight of people's gazes pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. As she made her way through the crowd, offering polite nods and forced smiles, she overheard fragments of whispered conversations. "Did you hear what happened with her husband? They say he has a whole other family now." Imagine going through all of this and still showing up here like nothing's wrong. Each comment was like a dagger to her heart, a reminder that her life had become fodder for the town's gossip mill. It hurt her deeply to realize that people she had known for years, people she had once trusted, were now reveling in her pain, dissecting her life as if it were a soap opera for their entertainment. She tried to ignore the stares, the murmurs, the pointed glances, but it was impossible to escape the sense that she was now a stranger in her own community. As the evening wore on, she found herself standing near the refreshment table, clutching a glass of water as though it were a lifeline. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and all she wanted was to slip out quietly and go home. But just as she was about to leave, an older woman from the community, Mrs. Thornton, approached her. "Maya, dear," Mrs. Thornton said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I just wanted to say, well, I think you're very brave for showing up here tonight, given everything that's going on. I can't imagine how difficult this must be for you." Maya forced a smile, knowing full well that Mrs. Thornton's words were anything but supportive. She could see the glint of curiosity in the woman's eyes, the thinly veiled satisfaction at having something new and scandalous to gossip about. Maya thanked her politely, excusing herself as quickly as possible, but the encounter left her feeling even more isolated. Throughout the evening, she continued to endure similar encounters, each one chipping away at the armor she had so carefully constructed. By the time she finally left, she felt as though she had been stripped bare, her emotions raw and exposed for the world to see. She returned home, her heart heavy, and found herself sinking into the sofa, overwhelmed by a profound sense of loneliness. Daniel, who had stayed home to give her space, was waiting in the living room when she returned. He looked up as she entered, concern etched into his features, but Maya couldn't bring herself to speak. Instead, she sat in silence, staring at the floor as the events of the evening played over and over in her mind. After a few minutes, Daniel reached out, placing a tentative hand on her shoulder. "Maya, I know this is hard. I know I'm the reason you're going through all of this, and I'll never be able to make it up to you. But please, if there's anything I can do, anything at all, just tell me." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and resentment. "Do you have any idea what it's like to walk into a room and know that everyone is judging you? That they're all dissecting every part of your life, your marriage, as if it's some kind of spectacle?" Daniel lowered his head, guilt evident in his expression. "I can only imagine, Maya. And I'm so sorry for putting you through this." His apology, while sincere, did little to ease the ache in her heart. She knew he felt remorseful, that he was genuinely sorry for the pain he had caused. But no amount of regret could change the reality of what had happened. She was living in the aftermath of his choices, paying the price for his mistakes, and it was a burden that felt almost too heavy to bear. The following days were filled with similar challenges. Maya continued to go to work, trying to focus on her responsibilities and maintain her professionalism, but the strain was beginning to show. Her coworkers, who had once been supportive and respectful, now seemed to regard her with a mix of pity and curiosity. She overheard whispers in the hallways, saw the sympathetic glances thrown her way, and felt the tension that filled the air whenever she entered a room. It was as though she were wearing a scarlet letter, a visible mark of her pain and humiliation. One afternoon, during a brief lunch break, she overheard a conversation between two colleagues in the break room. "Did you hear about Maya's husband? Apparently, he has another woman, and she's pregnant. Unbelievable. I never would have expected that from him. And poor Maya, she's still showing up to work every day, acting like nothing's wrong." The comments stung, each one a reminder of how far her life had fallen from the image of stability and respectability she had worked so hard to cultivate. She wanted to shout, to tell them that they didn't know the full story, that they had no right to judge her. But she knew that would only fuel the gossip further, and so she remained silent, swallowing her anger as she returned to her desk. As the days passed, Maya began to feel as though she were losing herself, her sense of identity slowly eroding under the weight of public scrutiny. She no longer recognized the woman she saw in the mirror each morning. The strong, confident person she had once been seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone who was fragile, vulnerable, and constantly on edge. But amidst the darkness, a small glimmer of hope began to take shape. One evening, as she was scrolling through her phone, she stumbled upon a support group for women who had experienced similar situations. The group was filled with stories from women who had endured the pain of infidelity, the public humiliation, and the struggle to rebuild their lives in the aftermath. Reading their stories, Maya felt a sense of kinship, a connection to others who understood the depths of her pain. She joined the group, initially as a silent observer, reading the posts and comments with a sense of both comfort and sorrow. Over time, however, she began to participate, sharing her own story and receiving messages of support and encouragement from women who had walked the same path. Their words became a source of strength for her, a reminder that she was not alone, that there were others who had faced the same challenges and emerged stronger on the other side. As she continued to engage with the group, Maya found herself beginning to heal, bit by bit. She started setting boundaries with Daniel, making it clear that if he wanted any chance of repairing their marriage, he would have to earn back her trust through consistent actions, not just words. She insisted that he attend counseling, both individually and as a couple, and he agreed without hesitation, determined to prove his commitment. At the same time, Maya took steps to reclaim her own sense of self. She began exploring new hobbies, reconnecting with old friends, and focusing on her career with a renewed sense of purpose. Slowly, she began to rediscover the woman she had been before the betrayal, the strong, independent person who refused to let others define her worth. And as she grew stronger, the judgment and gossip that had once tormented her began to lose their power. She learned to tune out the whispers, to let go of the need for others' approval, and to focus on her own healing journey. The opinions of strangers no longer held the same weight, and she found a sense of peace in knowing that her worth was not defined by others' perceptions. One evening, as she sat in her living room, scrolling through the support group's posts, she came across a comment that struck a chord deep within her. Sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we fight in silence, but those battles also teach us who we are, and they reveal our strength in ways we never could have imagined. Reading those words, Maya felt a sense of clarity, a realization that while her life had been forever changed, she was still standing, still fighting. She had faced betrayal, public humiliation, and the judgment of others, yet she had not been broken. Instead, she had been forged anew, her pain transforming her into someone stronger, more resilient, and unafraid to stand tall in the face of adversity. The fallout of Daniel's betrayal would always be a part of her story, but it would not define her. She was Maya, A woman who had endured heartbreak and emerged with a renewed sense of self. A woman who had Maya's newfound strength did not come easily, and each step toward reclaiming herself felt like a hard-won victory. But even as she built her walls back up, as she took control of her life and her identity, the lingering effects of Daniel's betrayal continued to surface, complicating her journey. Each decision she made seemed to carry twice the weight, a reminder of the precarious balance she was trying to maintain. She was willing to give Daniel a chance to repair their broken relationship, but she held tightly to the boundaries she had set, wary of letting him too close without earning back her trust. After weeks of counseling sessions and late-night conversations, Maya and Daniel were beginning to find a rhythm. Tentative, fragile, but undeniably real. Daniel was making sincere efforts to rebuild what he had shattered, showing up in ways that mattered. He was open about his own therapy sessions, candidly discussing his insecurities, his regrets, and the steps he was taking to understand his actions and become a better partner. In moments when they were alone, without the weight of their shared past pressing down on them, she sometimes caught glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with, the version of him that still lingered in her heart despite everything. But Hannah, and the reality of the child that would soon be born, hung like a shadow over every interaction, a constant reminder that this chapter of their lives could never be fully closed. Hannah continued to reach out, insisting on updates from Daniel, and at times, even seeking Maya's input, perhaps in a bid to alleviate her own isolation. Maya found herself torn between empathy and resentment. She could see that Hannah, too, was in a difficult situation, navigating the waters of single motherhood with little support. And while she felt a faint compassion for Hannah's struggles, she couldn't fully shake the bitterness of betrayal, the memory of that day in her office when everything had come crashing down. One morning, Hannah sent Daniel a message that stirred the waters again. The text was simple but direct. "I think we need to talk about visitation. I'm not going to be able to do this alone. It's not just about money. It's about support, a presence." When Maya saw the message on Daniel's phone, she felt a familiar tightness in her chest, a creeping sense of dread. She realized that support meant that Daniel would be a part of this child's life in a way that would demand more than occasional meetings or brief visits. That evening, after a long discussion with Daniel, they decided it was time to meet with Hannah once more. This time, they would discuss the practicalities of co-parenting, setting boundaries that would protect Maya's well-being while acknowledging the needs of the child. Daniel suggested that they meet at a local park, a neutral setting where emotions might feel less stifling than in the enclosed space of a cafe. The suggestion was intended to provide Maya with a sense of peace, a place where she could breathe deeply and perhaps distance herself, if only slightly, from the intensity of the situation. The day of the meeting was overcast, with a soft drizzle hanging in the air, lending the park an eerie quiet. Maya and Daniel arrived early, sitting together on a bench as they waited. She could feel Daniel's nervous energy beside her, his leg bouncing slightly as he fidgeted with his wedding ring. Maya took a deep breath, bracing herself for the conversation that lay ahead. She knew that she would have to look into the eyes of the woman who had torn her world apart, to discuss the future in a way that included this woman's child, Daniel's child, a reality that felt both surreal and painful. Hannah arrived a few minutes later, her hand resting protectively over her rounded belly. She looked tired, worn down by the months of emotional turmoil, yet there was a determination in her eyes that mirrored Maya's own. Without a word, she sat across from them, her gaze steady as she waited for them to speak. Daniel broke the silence first, his voice gentle but firm. "Hannah, we wanted to talk about what co-parenting will look like. I want to be there for the child, but we also need to respect boundaries, especially for Maya's sake. This situation is difficult for all of us, but I think we can find a way to make it work." Hannah nodded, her expression unreadable. "I understand, Daniel. I don't want to complicate things further. I can't do this alone. I never wanted to be a single mother, and I don't want our child to grow up feeling abandoned. I need to know that you'll be a part of their life, consistently. Maya watched Daniel's face as he nodded, his jaw set with resolve. She could see the guilt in his eyes, a sorrow that went beyond words. And yet he was determined, committed to doing right by this unborn child, regardless of the circumstances. She felt a flicker of admiration for him in that moment, a painful, reluctant respect for his sense of responsibility. But it was tempered by the sharp reminder that this responsibility had been born out of betrayal. Maya finally spoke, her voice calm but steely. "Hannah, I know you want Daniel's support, and I understand that. But this child's presence in his life cannot come at the expense of mine. I've been through enough. So if we're going to make this work, I need to know that you respect my boundaries too." Hannah looked down, her hand still resting on her belly. After a long pause, she nodded. "I do respect you, Maya. More than you know. This isn't how I wanted things to turn out either. I don't want to hurt you, but I also can't pretend that Daniel isn't part of this child's life." The three of them continued to talk, carefully and cautiously laying out a plan that would provide stability for the child while respecting Maya's need for distance. They discussed a visitation schedule, the expectations for financial support, and the communication boundaries that would be enforced to prevent unnecessary contact between Hannah and Maya. The conversation was tense, filled with awkward silences and hesitant words, but there was a mutual understanding that this plan was necessary for all of them to move forward. As the conversation neared its end, an unexpected moment of vulnerability surfaced. Hannah looked directly at Maya, her gaze softened, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry for everything," she said quietly. "I know that might not mean much, but I never wanted to hurt you. I got caught up in something I didn't fully understand. I know that doesn't excuse my actions, but I hope you can understand." Maya held her gaze, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions rise within her. She wasn't sure if forgiveness was possible, but in that moment, she could see the humanity in Hannah, the pain she carried as a woman caught in the aftermath of her own choices. With a slight nod, Maya offered her a quiet acknowledgement, not forgiveness, but perhaps an acceptance of the situation they now shared. The meeting ended with a sense of fragile peace, a tentative truce that allowed them each to step back and begin rebuilding their lives, separately yet interconnected by the child who would soon be born. As they walked back to the car, Maya felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a small but significant release of the tension that had gripped her since the day Hannah had walked into her office. That evening, back at home, Maya felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. The future remained uncertain, and the pain of betrayal was still fresh, but she knew that she had regained control of her life, even in the face of circumstances she hadn't chosen. She looked at Daniel, who was preparing dinner in the kitchen, and for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope, a faint but growing belief that they could, perhaps, rebuild something new from the ruins of their broken trust. As she sat down at the dinner table with him, Maya allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought of everything they had been through, the hurt, the anger, the overwhelming sense of loss. But she also thought of the strength she had discovered within herself, the resilience that had carried her through the darkest moments. She realized that she was not the same woman she had been before the betrayal. She was stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. After dinner, they sat together in silence, a comfortable quiet that held none of the tension of previous nights. And as they looked out the window at the city lights, Maya turned to Daniel, her voice soft but steady. "We've been through hell, and I don't know what the future holds," she said. "But if we're going to move forward, we need to do it with honesty. No more secrets, no more lies. I need to be able to trust you, truly and completely." Daniel nodded, his expression somber but resolute. "I understand, Maya. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn that trust back, and I'll never stop trying to make it right." They sat together, both of them knowing that the road ahead would be long and challenging, filled with moments of doubt and vulnerability. But in that quiet moment, there was a shared understanding, a fragile hope that they could rebuild, that they could find a new path forward, not by forgetting the past, but by facing it together, stronger than they had been before. As Maya lay in bed that night, her mind drifted to the future, to the possibilities that lay ahead. She didn't know what the coming months would bring, but she knew that she was ready to face them, armed with the strength she had found within herself, the support of those who had stood by her, and a renewed commitment to living her life on her own terms. The scars of betrayal would always be there as the weeks turned into months. Maya continued to navigate the fragile new reality she and Daniel had forged. There were good days, days where laughter returned to their home in soft echoes, where they could share a meal or a quiet evening without the shadow of betrayal looming over them. But there were also hard days, moments where doubt crept back in, where the pain of the past resurfaced like an old wound that refused to fully heal. On those days, Maya would retreat into herself, wrestling with the memories and questions that seemed to have no answers. Daniel, for his part, remained committed to his promise of transparency. He attended every counseling session, kept Maya informed of his interactions with Hannah, and approached each conversation with honesty, even when the truth was uncomfortable. He knew that the road to rebuilding her trust would be long and filled with setbacks, but he accepted this as part of his penance, a price he willingly paid in his effort to heal the rift he had created. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a fragile trust began to grow between them. Not the unblemished trust they had once shared, but something new, forged from the ashes of pain and honesty. Then came the day that would change everything once again. Maya was at work, preparing for an important presentation, when she received a call from Daniel, his voice tight with urgency. "Maya, it's Hannah. She went into labor early. The baby, our child, is coming." The news hit her like a punch to the gut. She hadn't prepared herself for this moment, hadn't truly considered what it would feel like to know that Daniel's child, a living symbol of his betrayal, was about to enter the world. Yet, as she stood there, frozen in the middle of her office, she felt a strange sense of calm settle over her, a quiet acceptance of the reality she had been dreading. "Are you going to be with her?" she asked, her voice steady, though a storm raged within her. "Yes," he replied, hesitating. "But I'll understand if you don't want to be part of this. I know it's complicated." Maya took a deep breath, grounding herself in the moment. "Go," she said finally. "Be there for the child. This is your responsibility, Daniel. Just keep me informed." After hanging up, Maya found herself staring at her reflection in her office window, watching as her own eyes betrayed the conflicted emotions she fought to contain. She felt a strange mixture of grief, relief, and even a faint hint of hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, this event would mark the beginning of a new chapter, one in which she could find peace with the choices that had been thrust upon her. Over the next few hours, Daniel sent updates, each one a reminder of the bond he would now share with Hannah through their child. Maya tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting back to the hospital, to the image of Daniel holding his newborn child for the first time. She felt a pang of jealousy, a deep, visceral ache that she hadn't anticipated. This child, through no fault of its own, would forever be a part of her life, a constant reminder of Daniel's betrayal and the complex web of emotions that had ensnared them all. Later that evening, Daniel returned home, his face weary but softened by a quiet joy that Maya hadn't seen in a long time. He sat down across from her, his expression a mixture of guilt and gratitude. "The baby, she's beautiful, Maya," he said softly, his voice filled with awe. "I didn't know how I would feel, but the moment I held her, everything just fell into place." Maya nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She wanted to feel happy for him, to share in the wonder of new life, but her heart was heavy, weighed down by the knowledge that this child symbolized the betrayal that had nearly destroyed them. Yet, as she looked at Daniel, she saw the love in his eyes, the genuine affection he felt for this new, innocent life, and something within her softened. "Do you want to meet her?" he asked tentatively, his gaze searching hers for any sign of willingness. The question lingered in the air, and for a moment, Maya felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble. She knew that meeting this child would be an act of grace, a step toward healing that required a strength she wasn't sure she possessed. But she also knew that if she continued to hold on to her resentment, it would poison her heart, her relationship with Daniel, and any hope of finding peace. After a long silence, she nodded. "Yes, I think I need to." The following day, Daniel took Maya to the hospital, guiding her through the sterile hallways to the room where Hannah lay, resting with the baby nestled in her arms. Maya felt her heart pound as they approached, each step bringing her closer to a moment she had both feared and anticipated. When they entered the room, Hannah looked up, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of Maya. There was a moment of hesitation, a shared understanding that this encounter was a difficult but necessary step in their journey. Hannah looked down at the child in her arms, then back at Maya, her expression softening. "Would you like to hold her?" Maya's heart fluttered, a mix of nerves and emotion washing over her. She glanced at Daniel, who nodded reassuringly. And then, with a steadying breath, she stepped forward, extending her arms as Hannah carefully placed the baby in her embrace. The baby was so small, her tiny features delicate and peaceful, her eyes closed in the innocent slumber of newborns. Maya felt a warmth spread through her, a deep, unexpected sense of connection to this child who had come into the world under such complicated circumstances. In that moment, the resentment, the anger, the hurt, all of it seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet acceptance that felt like a balm to her wounded heart. Holding the baby, Maya felt a tear slip down her cheek, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of release. She had spent so long fighting against the pain, resisting the reality that this child would be part of her life. But now, as she looked down at the tiny face nestled in her arms, she felt a strange kind of peace settle over her. The days that followed were filled with small steps forward, moments of healing and reconciliation that slowly wove together the fractured pieces of their lives. Maya and Daniel worked together to build a co-parenting arrangement with Hannah, setting clear boundaries and defining roles that allowed them each to find a sense of stability. The baby became a bridge between them, a reminder of the past, but also a symbol of new beginnings, a testament to their resilience and willingness to move forward. Over time, Maya found herself developing a bond with the child, a love that was complicated but genuine. She knew that this child would never replace the family she had envisioned, the life she had planned, but she also knew that there was room in her heart to embrace this new reality. She was stronger now, more grounded in her sense of self, and she realized that her capacity for forgiveness, for grace, was far greater than she had ever imagined. The community, too, gradually shifted its perspective. As people saw Maya's resilience, her commitment to building a positive future despite the challenges, they came to respect her strength, admiring the quiet dignity with which she handled the situation. The whispers and judgment faded, replaced by a sense of admiration that extended beyond her personal circle. She had become a symbol of endurance, a reminder that even the most painful experiences could be transformed into something meaningful. One evening, as Maya and Daniel sat together, watching the baby sleep peacefully in her crib, Maya turned to him, a gentle smile on her face. "We've come a long way," she said softly, her voice filled with a mixture of pride and humility. Daniel reached for her hand, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We have. And I wouldn't be here without you, Maya. Your strength, it's changed me, made me realize what truly matters. I'm so grateful for a second chance to be the man you deserve." Maya looked at him, her heart swelling with a quiet joy. She knew that their journey was far from over, that there would be challenges and moments of doubt, but she also knew that they had built something real, something unbreakable. Together, they had faced the depths of betrayal and emerged stronger, bound by a shared commitment to love, forgiveness, and growth. As she gazed at the child they had come to cherish, Maya felt a profound sense of peace, a certainty that, despite the twists and turns of life, she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had found her way through the darkness, guided by her own strength, her compassion, and her willingness to embrace the unknown. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet comfort of her family, she knew that she was ready for whatever lay ahead.